Shrek Treasure Hunt was one of the video games from my childhood that I never finished. I remembered playing it once or twice and just generally not having a good time with it. And as I searched YouTube, it became clear to me that I was not the only one with that opinion. But just how bad was it? Does it have any redeeming qualities? Would I see it differently now that I'm older? In this video, I revisit the game and find out. Shrek Treasure Hunt is a 2002 PlayStation game based on the 2001 movie Shrek. Most of you already know who or what Shrek is, but for those of you who don't, let me break it down for you real quick. More than 2 decades ago, the Walt Disney Company dominated the industry in creating full-length animated feature films, especially the ones based off of fairy tales. The romantic ones were always my favorite, and they followed a very basic formula. A beautiful princess or woman is unhappy with her life. She meets a handsome prince that makes her happy. They fall in love, but an evil person comes in between them. Oh no. They defeat the evil person and live happily ever after, which is often in the form of marriage. Predictable as they may be, it was very entertaining for young girls like me back in the day. I still enjoy the genre occasionally to this day, but I have moved on to cheering for guys hooking up with guys, but that's a whole different thing we're not discussing in this video. One day, the guys over at DreamWorks decided to challenge this romantic fairy tale formula by creating Shrek. In this movie, a green antisocial ogre is happily living in his swamp. A bunch of fairy tale creatures invade his swamp because a king forced them to live there, making him unhappy. Shrek makes a deal with the king to rescue a princess for him in exchange for getting rid of the fairy tale creatures. Shrek successfully completes his mission but realizes that he had fallen in love with the princess. Shrek interrupts the wedding between the king and the princess. The king gets eaten by the dragon. The princess turns into an ogre and they end up marrying each other and living happily ever after. Of course, it would be a much better experience if you actually go and watch the movie for yourself if you haven't. The point is, it was a romantic fairy tale themed movie that subverted expectations and young me loved that. I even remember spending an afternoon after school just rewatching it while having a little snack. It was one of my comfort movies. So when I first saw the game sitting on one of those storage bins at a game store, I immediately snagged it. However, when I got home and played it on my PS1, I was pretty disappointed. It felt so bare and boring. I only played it for a bit before it ended up collecting dust along with the other PlayStation games of a similar caliber. But as I grew older, I would think about that game every now and then, and I kept wondering, what happens at the end of that game? Perhaps it is my old creaking bones that long to be young again, or because I didn't want to accept the fact that I was really shit at the game, that I decided to come back and prove my gamer skills more than a decade later in a stream. And this video is sort of my documentation of my experience and my personal review of the game. The game starts with a brief cutscene explaining the situation Shrek has gotten himself into. He's planning a special picnic for Fiona, but all of the items he needed for it have gone missing, and he has to look for them all over the swamp before she arrives. In the game, they don't really tell you why these picnic items went missing, but if you look at the back cover of the case, it'll actually tell you that the 3 blind mice borrowed them. That's pretty much the extent of the story, though. It doesn't get any deeper than that. As for the gameplay, the main objective of the game is to collect the missing items from the different areas of the swamp. There are 10 areas all in all, and there are specific items that need to be collected from each of them to unlock and play the minigames. It is only after completing a minigame that you'll be rewarded with one of the missing items for Shrek's picnic with Fiona. That's right, you're collecting picnic items, not treasure. And you could argue that the value of an item depends on the person, but you cannot convince me that a pair of salt and pepper shakers are valuable enough to be the final item in the final stage of the game. Unless they're made out of gold, I guess. I start the game at the main swamp where Shrek's house is, and the first thing that I notice is Shrek's kind of fucked up looking face. Oh my god, Shrek, what happened to you? What did they do to you, boy? What do you do? Let me look at your face! Don't turn around! But that's kind of a given. PS1 games were notorious for its weird looking model faces, so I'll give it a pass. But what I can't let go of is this ridiculous camera and movement controls. What the fuck were they thinking? You cannot move the camera with your controller, and there are no options in the settings to configure it. You're just stuck with whatever the camera angle the game decides to give you. The sucky thing about this is sometimes you're stuck looking at the floor or at some area of the map that you're not really interested in. There was actually this one instance where I ended up walking on a part of the map that I felt like I wasn't really supposed to be able to walk to. One moment I see Shrek walking to the distance, thinking he was going to another area, when suddenly the camera pops right behind him. Somehow I feel like they wanted you to just look at the floor just so the game won't render so many things in the distance at once. I think that could explain the difference in quality between the areas and the scenes in the mini-games. The saturation of the colors of the pond vary here, though to be fair, it isn't the same scene, and I did notice that they like to change the colors of the water forms in this game. Anyways, the biggest difference is mini-games have more complete background details, whereas areas usually have this fog at a certain distance. Though this game has jump controls, there aren't too many jumping puzzles you can encounter. Although I did find it really weird that you'll sometimes find places like these that let you jump up to get to higher ground, but it ultimately leads to nowhere. I thought at some point that maybe it would lead to a secret area, but there doesn't seem to be anything there at all. Most of the time when I'm looking for collectibles, they're just on the ground waiting for me to pick them up. I do encounter enemies that can knock me down when I bump into them, but they're just slight annoyances that are easy to avoid. I don't lose any health or lives from them, they just exist to slow me down. However, when I play this in hard mode, which can be configured in the settings, bumping into them will make me lose one of the collectibles I obtained in that area, and I have to retrace my steps and look for what I lost. That's actually more annoying! The game does have shield power-ups that I can collect that can protect me from these enemies, but they only last 10 seconds. By the time an enemy appears, the effect would have already faded. This shield only seems to protect you if you pick it up at the right time and go to the right. There's also a spring power-up that lets me jump up really high and is a whole lot more useful than the shield power-up. However, this power-up is only available in one area and nowhere else. Why would you even introduce a mechanic like this if you're not even going to make the most of it? It doesn't make sense to me at all. They could have made some interesting and challenging jumping puzzles with it. In all honesty, the most challenging thing about this game is dealing with the camera, the controls, and moving across the water. I know it makes sense for characters to slow down when they're in water, but it's very frustrating in a game that already has problems with camera positions and movement. The only saving grace of this game is actually the mini-games. To make things fun, I'm gonna be ranking these mini-games and the areas with a tier list for each of them as I discuss them. Hurrah! Since I went through the areas and the minigames in a bit of a random order, I'm just gonna follow that order. For the first area, we've got the fields where you must collect 16 candy canes. The area is spacious and has roosters, sheep, and spinning scarecrows, along with a bunch of plants and trees. At the middle of all this is a windmill. Compared to all the areas of the game, I personally found this area the most boring looking one. The most interesting thing here was this random prop close to an exit, which doesn't even do anything. The game won't even let me get close or jump on it. Upon collecting every candy cane, the portal for the minigame Cotton Candy appeared at the entrance of the windmill. In this minigame, you need to catch 6 flies with a spiderweb covered stick in 60 seconds to obtain a picnic basket. The game is a reference to that scene in the movie where Fiona made a cotton candy spiderweb snack for Shrek. At first, I couldn't really understand why I wasn't catching any flies until the cursor locked onto them and turned red. It's kind of weird to me that they decided to make the spiderweb black for this, and I assumed that it was just so players could see it better. That was until I captured more flies and I realized that it was just a visual thing to show you that you're halfway through completing the minigame. Though I still think they could have just made the web white because it really just looked like a feather duster or something. The game wasn't particularly difficult, nor was it exciting. Okay, let's rate the area first. The fields is okay. It looks kind of nice, but like I said, it's really boring. I'm just gonna put you in D. For the game itself, let's see. Cotton Candy. It's not interesting at all. The second area is Tree Hollow, where you must collect 20 pumpkins. The entrance I went into for this area was a little weird. I get that it's part of the puzzle and I don't have a problem with that, but the aesthetics are really out of place. There's this, I assume, wooden grates that block the way and stone steps which led me to the pumpkin, and then there's suddenly some cream-colored pillars that seems more fitting for a Hercules video game. They're just so out of place. They could have just put rocks or stumps instead of those grates and pillars to keep the aesthetic of a swamp. It doesn't matter if it uses the same objects as the previous area. It fits a lot better. This does not. There's even this gated area where the key is located. It's a total mismatch. Going further into the area, I encountered a few jumping puzzles along with enemies like rabbits, alligators, and warthogs. This is actually one of the more interesting areas since it requires me to go through obstacles, unlike the fields where I mostly just ran around until I found everything. It is also the only area that had the spring power-up. Upon collecting every pumpkin, the portal for the minigame Catch the Worms appears at the entrance of the tree. For this minigame, you need to catch 10 worms in 60 seconds to obtain a vinyl record player. Is it normal for people to bring that big thing to picnics? The game is a reference to the meal Shrek had in his house just before the fairy tale creatures started swarming in. This game has pretty much the same mechanics as Cotton Candy, except this time you're using a fly swatter to catch the worms. That's a weird tool to use. The cursor doesn't lock onto the worms or turn red, but I did find that this minigame was a lot easier than the previous one because you don't have to be too accurate. As long as it was close enough to the cursor, Shrek would scoop up those wormies. Like the previous game, this was not really that challenging or interesting to me. Okay, for the area, I'm going to have to say it's definitely higher than Fields. But the thing is, I would put it at C because it has more interesting obstacles, but I can't put it higher than C because I really don't like how they went about with the design. Like I said, total mishmash. As for the minigame, I would say it's a little bit better than Cotton Candy, but it's not that great. The third area is the main swamp where you must collect 10 cheese wedges. Honestly, this could have just been named Shrek Swamp. This was actually the starting area for the game, but I skipped a few areas during the stream. There are a couple of warthogs running around, and there's a bridge over a moat surrounding Shrek's house. The area is spacious and has some rivers with lily pads, but there isn't anything particularly interesting here other than Shrek's house. It's not the best looking model, but at least you could recognize it. Upon collecting every cheese wedge, the portal for the minigame 3 Blind Mice appears at the entrance of Shrek's house. The game is based off of the scene in the movie where Shrek was trying to get rid of the 3 blind mice on his dining table. In this minigame, you need to direct the 3 blind mice to the other side of the table to capture them by tapping the buttons in the order that the game instructs you to press it. In exchange for completing the minigame, you get a firefly, jar, lantern of sorts. The game gives you 60 seconds for each mouse. I honestly hate these Simon Says types of games where you have to remember sequences and repeat them. I am terrible at memory games. This is why I keep dying in Among Us. It is not fun. Give me a day to memorize a poem and I could probably do well. Give me just 10 seconds to remember a short sequence and we're gonna be here all day. Thankfully, the game only requires you to remember 4 button presses at a time, and there are only 3 sets of mice. If you make a mistake, you have to repeat it, but at least you don't have to start over from the top. However, if you don't catch your mouse within 60 seconds, you lose the game. It's a pretty easy and simple minigame, and it gets points for an interesting setup. I initially didn't understand where this was going until they got to the end and got hooked, which I found really funny. Okay, for the main swamp, I would say this is probably the most movie accurate one among all of these locations, so this is automatically an A. As for the game, 3 blind mice is kind of interesting. I don't like Simon Says games, but it's a lot more interesting than the 2, so it goes to C. The 4th area is the outhouse, where you must collect 16 onions. In this area, you'll find warthogs running about, some sunken ground, a pond, and some trees, but there aren't any interesting obstacles or decorations, except for probably the key on a platform on top of a tree. It's the same as the fields area, where most of the collectibles can just be obtained by walking around. What's funny about this is I didn't even realize the box in the middle of the area was an outhouse until I was reviewing my footage and making my script. I kind of wish they at least made it look a little closer to the movie. They did add the moon-shaped hole, but come on. I mean, it would have been fine if it's just a random prop, but this area itself is called Outhouse. It's the focal point of the area. Even the drawing looked significantly better. Upon collecting every onion, the portal for the minigame Catch Some Weed Rats appears at the entrance of the outhouse. In this minigame, you need to catch 6 weed rats within 60 seconds to obtain a jar of eyeballs. Yummy! The game references the scene in the movie where Fiona and Shrek are barbecuing weed rats. You'd think it would be similar to the catching flies and catching worms minigame. It kind of is, but... Wait, what am I supposed to do? Like, oh my god, I'm supposed to squash them? What? Why do I have to squash them? First of all, seeing those rats getting squashed like that with a squeeze sound is disturbing. Second of all, he doesn't even collect them. He just steps on them, flattens them, and doesn't even pick them up. You're not catching them, you're just torturing them. I guess this is probably better than playing a minigame where you stab them with barbecue sticks. That aside, it was also an easy game, especially because you can actually stomp on 2 weed rats at a time. Okay, so for the outhouse, I think I would put you... Honestly, I didn't like this one at all. I'll put it in the lowest D. As for the weed rats minigame, it is disturbing, but it's funny, so it gets a, low C. Let's put it in low C. The 5th area is the Knights area, where you must collect 16 knight figurines. They really could have just called it the castle, really. This area is the most confusing one I encountered in this game. There's a bridge over a moat like the one in the main swamp with a castle in the middle. And for some reason, there are also some roosters here. Where are we, in the Philippines? The area is spacious but actually feels larger than it actually is if you blindly follow the circular path like I did. I actually got stuck here for a while because I couldn't figure out where to go to get the last knight figurine. And then I realized that there's actually like another moat with another bridge that leads to the actual castle, and the last knight figurine was just there. But if you did not unlock the area where the key is located yet, you won't have that looping problem. Instead, you're gonna have a headache trying to get all the figurines in that circle because you have to go back the other way. Another weird thing about this map are the stone platforms floating above the moat. When you see it, you'd get the idea that you're probably supposed to jump onto them to get somewhere else. It really looks like it was supposed to be a jumping puzzle, but there is just no way to jump over there. Trust me, I tried. It's just not possible. And you can't really say that they're just there for decoration because there is really no point to placing them there. You can't see anything that looks like that in the movie, and it has no other purpose. It doesn't even look good. It actually feels like they probably had the idea of making it as a jumping puzzle, but they changed their mind and just, well, kept them there. Also, another nitpick of mine, the castle doesn't even look like Farquaad's castle. They didn't even try. Upon collecting every knight figurine, the portal for the minigame Splat the Knight appears at the entrance of the castle. The game is based off of the scene in the movie where Shrek and Donkey arrive at Farquaad's castle for the first time and are greeted by this automated puppet show. For this minigame, you have to direct the crosshair to 10 knight puppets and throw tomatoes at them within 60 seconds to get a picnic basket. This one is actually pretty easy, and the game isn't too strict about accuracy either. As long as the crosshairs are dark red and you manage to throw the tomato even if the puppet is hiding behind the wall, it counts. Though it probably shouldn't. I do have to mention that sometimes you'd move the crosshairs close to the puppet, but it won't lock in no matter what you do. And you have to wait for the next puppet to come up instead. Okay, for the knight's area, doesn't look movie accurate. It's a little bit interesting. Would I say it's more interesting than Tree Hollow? I don't actually know, because there's nothing else that's good so far, so let's just put it in B for now. As for the minigame Splat the Knight, I would say this is actually pretty good. The graphics are pretty cute, and the game itself is not too bad. I do like it more than these four. The sixth area is the wooded area where you must collect 20 horseshoes. Horse hose? Wait, why did I write down horse hose? I find it really weird that they keep thinking of really weird names for the areas. I mean, like, instead of wooded area, they could have just called it the forest. I'd say it's a more cleaner and cozier looking version of the fields because it doesn't really have many obstacles you need to get through to collect the horseshoes. Though it did have this one portion of the map that had 2 treasure chests on the first 2 blocks and a key at the third one. There's actually no way to get to it until you complete a few mini-games. After you do, the treasure chests disappear and you can now obtain the key. That's right, you don't actually go and open up the chest, they just use them to block your path to the key. Yeah, so what? Yeah, I don't even know what to say. It's just so crazy that they even bothered to get treasure chest assets for that when they could have just used literally anything else. You can't even open them or get anything from them. This is also the area where you encounter this anomaly. Upon collecting every horseshoe, the portal for the minigame Swing on Chains appears at the entrance of the small hut. Whose hut is it? I have no idea. For this minigame, you have to jump across platforms, avoid fireballs, and swing on the chains within 98 seconds to obtain a pair of golden plates. I had whiplash upon starting this minigame on stream because the minigames before this were so freaking simple, and then you suddenly get this? This was significantly harder, and it took me a lot longer to finish than anything else I've played in this game so far. Timing the jumps can be a little tricky, and there are also moments where you have to jump down to get to the next platform without seeing where you're falling to. And just when you thought it was over and you've reached the end, the camera rotates to show you the rest of the obstacles, which happens 2 times. That's actually an interesting mechanic, to be honest. This game is likely referencing the part of the movie where Shrek and Donkey are trying to rescue Fiona from the dragon guarding the castle. Comparing it its level design to the other minigames, there's obviously a lot more thought put into it. Even the colors are nice to look at, though it can get a little bit frustrating. But I did manage to finish it in the end. Honestly, if I didn't notice that purple glow, I would have jumped to the right and would have completely missed it. So kudos to them for making every collectible glow purple so it's not confusing. You know, now that I think about it, the wooded area isn't even connected in any way, shape, or form to the minigame, unlike the other locations. But well, that's just how it goes. Wooded area, I'm gonna be putting you like just above the fields. Because I do think you're a little bit more interesting than the fields, I guess. Not by much. As for Swing on Chains, you're immediately going to A. You might get to the S, but let's see, we'll see. You're like the best looking minigame so far. So yeah, you deserve that A. The 7th area is the Abandoned Tower, where you must collect 10 fireballs, or rather 10 lava balls as the game likes to call it. Collectibles in this area are very few and spaced far apart, unlike the other areas where each collectible can be seen close to each other like a trail. It's a strange design choice, and I would have personally preferred it if there was a consistent number of items per area, or at least have enough of them to decorate most of the location. Because as it is, it feels emptier than it should be, considering the fact that this is actually one of the more well-constructed areas in the game. I like the level design of this area because it gives you a lot of spaces to explore. They utilize blocks that are on top of water, there are sheep and ram that can serve as decoration and obstacles, and there are paths that gives you a view of other paths that you have to search for, like this raised bridge that leads to a key. The bridge goes down after you complete a few minigames. To me, the decorations feel cohesive and complement each other. There is just one problem. This place doesn't look like anything you see in the movie at all. Even the tower is strange. There's some thought put into the design, but it's not a tower from Shrek. It actually made me wonder if this was from a different game and they just used the assets to make this game instead. If this tower looks familiar to you in any way, let me know in the comments. Upon collecting every lava ball, the portal for the minigame Cross the Bridge appears at the entrance of the tower. For this minigame, you need to cross the bridge while dodging jumping fireballs to collect utensils within 99 seconds. That sounds a little bit extreme. Why not just, pack finger food like, sandwiches and hot dogs or something? Now that I think about it, I don't think any of the food items we actually have needed utensils in the first place. Yeah, I know. Stop ruining the immersion, cheesy. The game is based off of the scene where Shrek and Donkey were crossing the bridge in the movie. Though that one doesn't seem as dangerous since it doesn't really have any fireballs jumping at you or, planks that just suddenly fall out of nowhere. Except for that one time. The gameplay is not as complicated as the previous platforming minigame, but it's still just as annoying. It's hard to time the jumps perfectly so that they land on the safe planks, and sometimes you do end up on a plank but they end up shaking and falling into the lava. Aside from that, Shrek keeps falling through these really small gaps between planks, which realistically, he shouldn't even be able to slip through. And when I make a mistake and fall, I have to start from the very beginning of that section. Yes, just like the previous minigame, this has 3 sections. I had to cross 3 rickety bridges, and it was hell. After several tries and with just 10 seconds left in the timer, I made my last jump and grabbed those utensils. Okay, let's see. So for the Abandoned Tower, this is a little bit hard because, like I said, I really like how they made the map. The thing is, it's nowhere close to anything in the movie, so it's really hard to place this anywhere. I think I really want to put this in B. It's nothing like anything in the movie, but the map looks good, okay? In my humblest opinion, the map looks good. As for the minigame Cross the Bridge, okay. Between these two, I think I like Swing on Chains a little better, so I'll still put you in A, but you're in the low A tier. The 8th area is the old mineshaft where you must collect 16 dwarves. Yeah, those are dwarves. Wait a minute, is there even a mineshaft in Shrek? At this point of the game, I feel like the developers don't really know what other stages to add, and they instead decided to add elements relating to the fairy tale creatures that the Shrek movie referenced. In this case, Snow White and the 7 dwarves. They added a mineshaft because that's where the dwarves went to work. I'm gonna be honest, it's weird to have it there, but if you compare it to the other weird areas we've seen so far, this is actually a lot more on point with the Shrek universe. I can actually see this location existing there even if it was never shown in the movie, so it gets some points for that. The area has a river, plants here and there, some rabbits, squirrels, and warthogs moving about. Other than that and the mineshaft, there's really not much else to see here. Upon collecting every dwarf, the portal for the minigame Tug of War appears at the back entrance of the mineshaft. For this minigame, you play a Tug of War type of game with a couple of dwarves. But instead of pulling a rope, you push Snow White's casket on a table. This minigame actually caught me off guard. I was not expecting to see the scene in a movie where they were fighting over the dining table with Snow White's casket on it to be made into a minigame. This has gotta be my favorite minigame in Shrek Treasure Hunt simply because of the sheer ridiculousness of it. So the way this minigame works is like the Dance Dance Revolution game where you press a specific button when it stops at the target spot. Except you're not pressing to the beat of your music for this one. For every correct button pressed, Shrek advances to the right while the opposite happens when you make a mistake. You need to push the casket until its left edge lines up with the left edge of the table within 60 seconds. It's not too difficult or complicated, but it's also not super easy. Upon winning the minigame, you get this, are those bongos? Some kind of stool? Oh! They're wooden mugs with straws! Oh, that was so confusing. Okay, let's see. Old mineshaft should be... It's less interesting than the abandoned tower, but it fits with the universe of Shrek. But is it better than the Knights area? I'm gonna put this in a high C, I think. As for the game, this is probably a controversial take. I just... You know, I'm gonna put it here, okay? No one question it. No one question it, okay? No. The 9th area is the ancient Overflow. I'm not even sure if that's like a word that you normally use to call dams or, you know, sewage. I don't know. It's just such a weird name. In this area, you have to collect 10 fish bones. Nice! We're cleaning up trash this time! The area is pretty spacious and also as detailed as the abandoned tower area. There are bridges everywhere along with a bunch of squirrels and sheep. There's even this one gated structure that looked like it was part of a factory, but it was never really accessible or used for anything. Further up, you'll see a locked sewage gate near another bridge where a key is. Again, yet another level that looks like it should have belonged to a different game, yet somehow it ended up in a Shrek game. Even though none of this has anything to do with the movie. I know some games intentionally do this and it's more of a creative choice. I get that. I completely get that. But the thing is, it doesn't even fit in the universe of where the movie takes place. You could have made the campsite of the fairy tale creatures. You could have made a kingdom of Farquaad. Show them villager houses and whatnot. The Colosseum where Shrek fought knights. Maybe even an area that actually showed the dragon's castle in more detail. Maybe even this rocky area if you really wanted something more simple. There's so much stuff in the movie you could have taken. And you created this instead. I don't understand. Upon collecting every fishbone, the portal for the minigame Swamp Fishing appears at the end of the bridge near the sewage gate. For this minigame, you have to cast your line towards the ripples that appear and wait for the fish to bite. And once you get a bite, you reel it in. Very straightforward. Am I the only one who wonders why there's always a fishing minigame in most games? Not that I'm complaining. I love fishing games. I really, really do. Although I gotta say, I'm pretty sure Shrek doesn't fish this way. There is no time limit for this one, but you'll have to catch 9 fish in order to get the jar of honey. Of course, not everything you fish out is fish. The spot where you fish also changes every 3 catches, which makes things a little more visually interesting. It sounds deceptively simple, but this game actually took quite a bit of time because of all the waiting and trial and error I had to do because I couldn't understand how you're supposed to catch the fish at first. It's very hard to tell whether you have a fish or not. In the first spot, you could just cast the line anywhere and reel it in because sometimes that's all it takes to get a fish, but this strategy is not as effective in the last 2 spots. It's also very frustrating that you have to reel in the line all the way back if you want to cast the line again, unlike in other games where you just press the same button you used to cast the line to instantly get it back. I also noticed that whenever Shrek scratches his butt, you lose control over the line. You have to actually wait for him to finish scratching his butt before you can move again. I think that's ridiculous and funny, but I don't like this kind of interruption in this game. Also, what is that white thing at the end? Of all the minigames, this one was the least hectic one. And while the vibe is supposed to be relaxing, I get really frustrated over this minigame. I really hate it. It pales in comparison to the other fishing games in other video games. I really, really don't like how janky this is. I do not like it at all. The map looks kind of good, but it doesn't really fit with the Shrek universe. I'm gonna put you in high C. This is the only thing I think makes sense for this particular area. As for swamp fishing, no, you go to D. I hate you. Before I talk about the final minigame, I have a little confession to make. After the 9 areas and minigames were done, I made a fatal mistake during my stream. Oh no. Okay, so what happened is I accidentally unplugged my headset and now I can't hear a thing. I accidentally unplugged my headset, which caused the game's sound to disappear. When that happens, I usually just reopen the game. Guys, I have a really big problem. I was trying to save and the game kind of closed on me and I think I lost a lot of progress. Okay, the fishbone one we didn't do. The lava balls, the dwarves. Oh no. I gotta do the bridge thing again. Oh no. So I had to redo the last 3 minigames I did and it was full of pain. Moving on to the final area, we've got the waterfall where I must collect 30 keys. Unlike the previous areas, the collectible for this area aren't all found here. You have to revisit the other areas for those other keys. As I've said previously, those keys are only unlocked after playing a few minigames, though I can't really tell which minigames unlock which key. I initially thought it might be based on the minigame of that area, but after playing it again offline, that wasn't the case. I finished the Splat the Night minigame in the Nights area and this part is still locked. However, when I went to the waterfall area, the key that was locked behind the gate was now unlocked. It's a little weird, but it is what it is. The area was very spacious with a waterfall at the center falling into a large pond. The pond has a trail of stones where some of the keys can be found. There were also squirrels balancing on top of wooden logs and alligators swimming in the pond. There's also an entrance by the waterfall where the portal to the minigame appears in. But other than that, there really wasn't much to see. I honestly don't know why they decided on having the waterfall be the final area. It doesn't even have that epicness of a final level. If I were to pick among the existing levels, the night area might be more appropriate because it's larger and the castle feels more imposing. It also fits in with the vibe of the minigame for the area, which is collect the armor. The game is based off of the scene where Shrek was picking up armor from random corpses and exploring the dragon's castle with Donkey. For this minigame, you play a platformer where you have to go through the castle to collect 7 pieces of armor within 98 seconds to obtain salt and pepper shakers. I just feel like this is too much effort just to get salt and pepper shakers of all things. I mean, couldn't they have just had a better prize for this one? Something that I could actually be excited for? I mean, I guess seasoning your food is important, but you know, maybe season your food before you leave the house so you don't actually have to bring that to your picnic. I don't know, just a wild thought. Then again, you can't really do that if it's missing in the first place. Never mind. Compared to the previous 2 platformers, Collect the Armor was a lot more complex. The timing was a bit tighter in some instances, like at the start where I have to avoid getting burned to death by the dragon or getting hit by a fireball, both of which would send me back to the start of the room. Levers have to be pulled to unlock areas or platforms, and there are several different rooms you have to pass through. But in terms of difficulty, this was actually a lot easier than the other 2. Mostly because there isn't a lot of falling into a lava pit involved. You do have a bunch of knights in armor walking around that can attack you when you're near them, but they can easily be avoided by walking around them or timing your advances. I was actually doing fairly well in my first run until I reached this one part. I kept trying to jump over this pit and I just couldn't reach the other side because of this rock falling into it. Was that really necessary? But I figured they wouldn't let this game go up on shelves if people couldn't complete it, right? I thought maybe my timing was just off and you had to be very specific about when to jump. And I kept trying and I even had to do a second run because I ran out of time, specifically on this part. And it was only after I looked up another person's playthrough of the game that I discovered that you could actually run in this minigame. I know what you're thinking. Cheesy. How can you possibly not know you can run in this game after playing it for more than 3 hours straight? Before you judge me, let me explain. Outside of the minigames, Shrek by default runs and you press square to walk while using the arrow buttons. It's even here at the controls page with variations. But what's not at the controls page is what happens when you're inside the minigames. When you play the 3 platformer minigames, the controls are flipped. Shrek will walk by default and you press the square button to run instead. To be fair, before you actually play the minigame, they do have a section for the controls and I'm kind of a dumbass for not looking at it and not noticing that Shrek only walks inside these platformer minigames, unlike when he's outside of it. However, I do feel like it's still a weird decision to flip the controls like that. It feels very unintuitive. Okay, let's see. Where do you fall, Waterfall? Okay, I gotta say it's better than Tree Hollow. I don't think it's better than the old mine shaft. Can I put Abandoned Tower in A tier? You know what? Yeah, I can. Maybe Ancient Overflow would be here. On second thought, I think I rated Knight's area way too high. It's a whole lot of nothing and a whole lot of looping, and I think it's not really that interesting. Tree Hollow is a lot more interesting, even though it's a mismatch. Waterfall, kind of like similar to the Knight's area, but it has more stuff in it that's a little more interesting, like the rocks on the water. Old Mineshaft is kind of meh, so I guess I'd put it down here. I think Abandoned Tower and Ancient Overflow is on the same level. I feel like Main Swamp is here. Old Mineshaft is also here. I'm not gonna lie, I really like the Abandoned Tower the most, even though it has nothing to do with Shrek. It just looks very nice. So yeah, that's my tier list for the areas. As for the minigames, collect the armor. Honestly, this is much better than cross the bridge and swing on chains. So I'll put you... You know what? Would I say it's just as good as Tug of War? Or is it better than Tug of War? I mean, I guess it can be better than Tug of War. There you go. It's better than Tug of War. You want to know one more thing that me and my viewers realized during the stream while I was playing this particular game? The timer doesn't accurately count by seconds. As you can see here, I've cropped the timers for one of the minigames in easy and hard mode to show how fast it takes for a second to pass. Nothing has been sped up or slowed down. I'm not going to do this for every minigame, mind you, or just 3 of them. In our first example, we have Cotton Candy. Both of them ended at 1 second and 30 out of 60 frames. There's a bit of a delay, but it's not too big of a deal. In our second example, we have Catch the Worms. Both of them ended at 1 second with a 1 frame difference in hard mode, but that's not really much of an issue. In our third example, we have Swing on Chains. Hard mode ended at 1 second and 28 frames, while easy mode ended at a whooping 4 seconds and 1 frame. I even tried this in the second version of the game. Hard mode ended at 1 second and 19 frames, while easy mode ended at 3 seconds and 37 frames, which is a little faster than first version, which I played on stream. And yes, you heard that right. There are 2 versions of the game, and we'll talk about that later. This whole thing is very bizarre. I'd understand if there was just a little bit of delay, but the 4-second thing shows me that this is very intentional. The game itself doesn't slow down while you play in the easy mode of Swing on Chains, so you can't say that this is due to lag. If you're like me, you'd immediately think that they could have just added more seconds to the timer instead of this weird thing, and probably thought that this was some kind of bug. I actually had a theory that maybe the timer was an animated GIF and was placed at the corner of the game and they stretched out the duration or something. However, after some thinking, I figured out a possible explanation. Maybe the reason why they stretched the timer for Swing on Chains or some of the other minigames was because the timer couldn't go past 99 seconds. That's likely the limit the programmers or the game engine has for the game. It's the only explanation that makes sense, especially since I've never seen the timer or any other number in the game in triple digits during any of my playthroughs on stream and off stream. This could also explain why in some minigames the timer resets when you enter a new stage or area. Also, playing minigames in hard mode is agonizingly painful. Because it gives you less time, you have a smaller margin for error. When playing Splat the Night in normal mode, you get 59 seconds, while in hard mode, you get 44 seconds. If you take your time and manage to miss 1 or 2 nights, you won't have enough time to splat all the nights you need. Now let's talk a bit about the design and overall aesthetic of Shrek Treasure Hunt, starting with the background design. Overall, I think they did a decent job portraying a swamp in certain areas of the exploration portion of the game, but I think they kind of lost direction halfway through when they started adding weird elements to it that just doesn't make sense in the setting of the game or the movie. While the colors they use for the backgrounds are accurate to what swamps are in real life, I can't help but feel that as a video game aimed at children with a whimsical plot, they could have made it a little more colorful. If you muted the music, the game just felt so gloomy with those gray skies and neutral colors. I also want to point out that the lighting in certain areas are a little odd. Some corners have some kind of colored light from them and it just doesn't make sense. Aside from that, because the areas don't have a specific path or flow to it like other platformer games and just have big spaces instead, it's easy to get lost and confused, especially since the background details can feel samey or repetitive. While it's not really necessary for most video games like this, it's making me want a minimap just because of how confusing it is to traverse each area. I think the biggest factor that contribute to this confusion is the fact that the camera just keeps pointing in angles that makes it hard to look around and you can't really see too far ahead either. However, when you go into the minigames, the background design is such a drastic improvement. Just look at the background I'm using right now. This is from the Swamp minigame. For each minigame, the colors are much brighter. In platformers, there's a specific path to follow, and the overall vibe is just more engaging. If they just scrapped the area exploration and just made the video game with just platformers, with maybe a sprinkle of the other minigames in between, it would have been so much better in my opinion. The background design of the minigames also feel a lot more accurate to the parts of the movie they referenced. You can see the giant trees in the background similar to the one in the movie in Swamp Fishing. The tile pattern in the Dragon's Castle and the Collect the Armor minigame are in a different style but still somewhat similar. It also copied the color scheme of that scene. The castle backdrop in Splat the Night is also fairly similar to the one in the movie, but with some differences for the gameplay to make sense. Minigames just feels like an entirely different game from the exploration part of Shrek Treasure Hunt. However, I do want to point out that even then, the style of the minigame's level design still varies. Some minigames like Cotton Candy, Catch the Worms, and Tug of War make use of pre-rendered backgrounds, making the image nice, crisp, and detailed, while some minigames like Swing on Chains, Collect the Armor, and Cross the Rope Bridge do not. As for the character design, I don't have many complaints other than Shrek's skin not being accurate to the original color in the movie. I know the face doesn't look that great, but it doesn't really bother me too much, especially since this game was created during the PS1 era, where the faces are just generally derpy. As for the enemies, I'm not gonna talk about each and every one of them. There are too many and I'm not that invested enough in them to be honest. I do like that they made a good variety so that players can find a different combination of enemies for each area. It makes sense that they're all based on animals except for the dragon and suit of armor at the Collect the Armor minigame. But it doesn't make sense for certain ones to be in the area like those roosters at the Knights area. I do give them props for being a little creative with some of them like the spinning scarecrows or the squirrels on top of logs. Of all of these characters, I think the dragon might be the most accurate looking one. But I do have to admit that she still looks pretty derpy in certain angles. Now let's talk about the opening screen and the user interface. The opening screen features Shrek reaching for a key, which is one of the collectibles for the Waterfall area. It's simple, the colors are great, and it's connected to the gameplay. However, it's the screen after that where I start disliking the art direction. This is the main menu screen. The scroll is a fun idea, but I'm not a big fan of the font itself, especially when it's highlighted in neon green. It's honestly annoying to read. I wouldn't mind it as much if they didn't put the letters so close together and made the font less pixelated. It just looked so messy and low quality. And I can tell that it's not just an issue due to it being a PlayStation 1 game. You can see from the previous screen that they can do higher quality details than this. And then there are these buttons. Why is the top part of the buttons clipped? That's supposed to be a circle! And they didn't even bother adjusting the placements of these button directions below to make it away from the scroll's line border. When you go to the control configurations, you can actually see the same font used. And I actually really like how it looks here. I wish that they just let it be used this way all throughout the game. Even the buttons here look different and much nicer. It feels as if someone else worked on this screen and the main menu because the quality difference is very noticeable. The same can be said with the scroll with the minigame instructions at the start of the game. Look how much more legible the words are. If you go to volume settings, it's also a different screen, a different design, and it matches the main menu more than the configuration menu. I actually like the screen a bit because I thought that the puppets playing the music was cute. But I can't help but feel like this was misused effort. I'm not saying they shouldn't have made this. I really like this. I'm saying I wish they put this much effort into making other areas of the game that needed it. And then there are these minigame unlocked pages, which is also a different style. Same font, but much more readable as well. You also have this map, which has an interesting style, but you can barely make out what some of those items and locations are. But the one I like the most would probably be the drawings for the loading screen for the minigames. And also, I would just like to add that the design of the counters and the timers during area exploration and minigames aren't even consistent. I think there were a lot of very interesting ideas in there. And I know it's possible to have many different artists with different art styles working on a single game. But there should be a clearer art direction to make it all feel cohesive. Have just one style for buttons or the fonts, or have a specific person in charge of all of the menu UI and another person for the loading screen, and so on. Another detail that I do want to mention as well are the cinematics. I love that they added a winning and losing scene at the end of minigames, and a nice scene of Shrek and Fiona's picnic at the end of the game. However, what I don't like so much is the graphics used for the storybook scene at the start of the game. The art style isn't terrible. I just think that because it wasn't rendered too well, some of the details were lost and the pictures ended up looking muddy and faded. Because of the low resolution of these cinematic renders, it might have been better if they just used the same art style as the drawing at the start of the minigames, since they're a lot clearer, simpler, and has less details. Now that we've covered the aesthetic of the game, let's talk about the packaging it came in. I know it's not really part of the game itself, but it is also just as important as every visual inside of it. This is what a potential customer sees and may determine if your game will be bought or passed on for a more interesting looking title. Honestly, the cover is pretty whimsical. I love the balance of the colors and how the green just pops against the blue, white, and browns. I also like the fact that it hints at the story of the game. You can see the mischievous three blind mice carrying some items, and you can tell that it came from the basket because of the onion skins that were left inside. And you can tell that they stole it from Shrek and Fiona, who are surprised and not very happy to see their basket empty. The backside is pretty simple but doesn't really tell you much about the game. But then again, back in the day, the backside never really tells you much at all. It just gives you little tidbits and some screenshots. The thing is, the screenshots are so small and deceptive here, and they made the colors brighter, giving you an impression that it's much more polished and fun than it ended up being. When you open the case, you'll see the CD designed with the same face as Shrek and Fiona have from the front cover and the logo of the game. But when you remove the CD, you'll see this inside, which I thought was pretty clever and cute. I like it a lot. Let me tell you something I accidentally discovered. While I was looking through the soundtrack of Shrek Treasure Hunt, I decided to watch another YouTuber's footage of the game because I didn't really want to hear myself talk in my own footage. I came across a playthrough by a channel called The Sweet Banana and was surprised to see these two screens at the start of his game. My game never asked me which language I wanted, and how come his main menu has better fonts? And that was how I found out that Shrek Treasure Hunt actually had two versions. The one I played on stream was the North American version, which was released on October 18, 2002, while the one The Sweet Banana played was the PAL version, which was released in November 29, 2002. Why is there even two versions, you may ask? I looked into it, and it turns out that this was because back in the day, there were two television display formats specific to certain regions, and video games were modified to fit them. Nowadays though, this kind of region locking isn't as common in modern video games. Other than the television display formats, the PAL version of Shrek Treasure Hunt has many significant improvements over the North American version that I played. First, players of the PAL version get to choose the language they want to play in between English, French, Spanish, and German. Second, the font used for all the menus and the rest of the UI, except for the numbers for the timer, was changed. Instead of this chunky, almost unreadable font, you get the squiggly, yet clear and legible font. It was a clear upgrade, and I wish they applied this to the North American version too. I still don't like how bright that green is, but at least I can read it better. They're still kind of bad at positioning these texts though, and the buttons below are still cropped. Third, the signages for the areas have replaced the text with images from the map. I love this change. It makes a whole lot more sense, especially because the map itself doesn't even have labels. When I see the signage in the North American version, most of the time I'm not even sure which location in the map they were even referring to. Besides, the names of the locations were just terrible. Like, why would you call the forest the wooded area? And why is the castle called the Knights area? Who is in charge of naming these? They're probably the same people who thought calling fireballs lava balls were better. Fourth, since the PAL version runs in 25 FPS unlike the North American version that runs in 30 FPS, the game is noticeably slower. As a result, moving around feels a lot less slippery and there's a bit more control at times, but the camera and overall movement is still just as janky. The soundtrack of the game consists of 15 songs, and you've been listening to it all this time. That's right, all the music I've been playing in the background of this video came from this game. I personally enjoy the music. It's the only thing I actually like about having to go back into the game to collect additional footage while making this video. It's very whimsical and fun and manages to brighten up the mood in the most grayest and lifeless parts of the game. I also like that the tracks have a uniform theme, and whenever the game switches to a different track, it doesn't take me out of the game. Sometimes I don't even notice it because they sound very similar in certain cases, but without being repetitive or annoying. For this section of the video, let's turn off the BGM for a bit so we can listen closely to the examples I'll be sharing with you. Here are two sets of examples. This first set has a bouncy kind of vibe. This second set feels more majestic. There's enough difference between the similarly sounding track to make them interesting. However, I feel the exact opposite when it comes to sound effects. By default, the sound effects are at the same volume as the music and can feel very overwhelming when they play. You walk into the swamp and suddenly you hear loud water noises. You come across a squirrel balancing on top of a log and it sounds like a large boulder is rolling around. Sometimes you'll even hear weird sounds like this one. And don't get me started with the jumping rabbits at Tree Hollow. In other games, they have variations for certain sounds that are played over and over in order to prevent audio fatigue and irritating the player. For this game, I don't think they did anything like that at all. If you want to lower the volume of the sound effects, you have to exit your game to access the settings in the main menu. Then, when you load back into your save to regain your progress, you still respawn in the first area. Even if you lower the volume of the sound effects, it's actually still annoying. And if you remove the sound effects completely, it feels dull even if the music's so lively. Aside from everything I've discussed so far, I have two very specific icks or pet peeves about this game. Number one, IP possessiveness. What do I mean by this? Look at the opening screen and the intro scene. We own Shrek, we own Fiona, and we own Shrek's ears. And in case you forget, we'll also put it here in the storybook. I know it's not the best quality, and you can hardly make out what letter or symbol that is, but what else could it be? That is most likely an R, and that looks very much like a TM. It's not really a big deal, but it's just so ridiculous to me that they felt the need to be that specific about everything. Number two, where the heck is Donkey? I know the title of the game is Shrek Treasure Hunt, not Donkey Treasure Hunt, but you have to admit that Donkey plays a huge role in the movie and he's almost always in frame. Not having him in this game is a travesty. I wish they could have had him be a character you encounter in one of the minigames, or maybe even have him be a playable character there. Like, instead of having Shrek cross the bridge, you have Donkey do it instead. With Fiona, it's understandable not to have her anywhere other than the ending scene because the whole point of the game is for Shrek to prepare a picnic for her as a surprise. Aside from having Donkey there are a few changes that I think could improve the game. First, make the map more clear. Simplify it. The art style looks nice and matches the theme, but the main problem is, it's hard to tell what some of the icons are. Like here at the top, I would not even realize it's a sewer pipe or a dam until I visited the area. It's also hard to tell what some of these items next to them are. In my opinion, it might have been better to use the same style as the drawings for the minigames. At least with this, the pictures are a lot clearer and easier to understand. The text below is readable, but I think a more opaque or simple background for this might be better. Second, make the explorable areas have something to do with the Shrek universe, or at least believably belong to it. There are many games based on movies that create levels that aren't based on anything you see in the movie. It's possible to make it work, but you have to really think about what you're putting in there. The mineshaft works because it's directly tied to the dwarves that appear in the movie, even if it was just for a bit. But the abandoned tower does not, and I'm not even sure what this design is referencing. It doesn't look like Fiona's tower, and I highly doubt it's referencing Rapunzel or any other fairy tale. Third, add dates and or time to the save files. I will never figure out which of these is my most recent save. It's horrible. Please don't do this if you're planning to make a game of your own. It would also be so much more practical for the player if you actually load into the game at the location where you saved, instead of always respawning at the first area. Fourth, make the exploration portion of the game more interesting with jumping puzzles and obstacles. Don't just make Shrek walk around to collect stuff. It's easily the most boring part of the game. You don't want people to just be excited for the minigames, you want them to be entertained all throughout their playthrough. Shrek Treasure Hunt can be completed in about 2 to 3 hours. It took me a little over that because I had a streaming mishap, but it's a pretty short game overall. Did I enjoy it? Honestly, it did have some interesting moments. But I think what made this game fun for me was the fact that I was streaming it and I got to share an experience with an audience. I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much if I played it by myself. As for replay value, players could try and play the game in hard mode after completing it if they liked it enough and want a challenge. However, there really isn't much to gain from playing it again. There are no new content after you complete it, so I see it as a one-time play type of game, unless you're doing a speedrun for it. Now, for all of this, how much do you think the game costs? For real, give me a guess down in the comments before I tell you. I want to see if someone guesses correctly. But before that, there's actually a couple of interesting tidbits I discovered while researching this game. The publisher of the game is TDK Mediactive. DICE Canada was initially planned to develop it, but switched focus to Shrek Extra Large and the Code Monkeys took over instead. When the game was released, it was published under a new division they called TDK Impulse, which were games that were budget titles and were priced very low. Shrek Treasure Hunt was sold at $9.99. It might sound pricey for a few of us who have gotten used to playing free or cheaper games nowadays, but back in the day, PlayStation 1 games were priced at $40 to $50, so this was actually a really tempting buy. However, I don't think it was tempting enough. After Shrek Treasure Hunt, if my research is correct, they only released one more title under TDK Impulse, which is Land Before Time, Big Water Adventure, before TDK Interactive was acquired by Take-Two Interactive by the end of 2003. So who's this game for anyway? Judging from the game mechanics that we've been exposed to so far, it makes me think that the game was made with the intention to be played by young children. There is no violence and the objectives are pretty straightforward. Unfortunately, the controls are so shit that I don't think any kid would really be patient enough to sit through them. If there are some that were, they are probably speedrunning gods by now, or working a job that requires extensive patience and repetition like a call center agent or an orthodontist. Realistically speaking, I think this game is created for people like me who like to entertain people with their suffering, with their unnecessarily thorough research, or with colorful and creative words to say that this game sucks. And those are my thoughts on Shrek Treasure Hunt. A terrible, yet in some way still endearing childhood game of mine. I've actually been working on this video on and off for over a year. I initially thought this was going to be a short and quick video, but I kept noticing new stuff I wanted to comment on, and it just ended up being this monster of a task. Admittedly, this was a video that tested my patience, but simultaneously, I enjoyed. I liked discovering little things about it and doing some research here and there, and I really hope that you guys enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it, because I would really love to do more stuff like this. Have you ever played this game? Would you if you haven't yet? Do you have a childhood game that is just as mind-numbing? Let me know down in the comments below. For now, I'm just gonna go do my thing, and you guys do your thing, and I'll see you guys later. Take it easy and stay cheesy.